That's why the head of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, and the guy who everybody knows is actually making the decisions and calling the shots and running the show, Stephen Miller, both of them should be out of jobs.
This may look like a heated floor speech, but it's actually a stress test of democratic oversight. What's really being tested here is whether executive power can operate without meaningful restraint when public trust erodes. This raises broader questions about accountability inside federal agencies and who answers when standards are crossed. In this video, we'll break down how a single Senate moment exposes deeper cracks in oversight, authority, and constitutional responsibility.
Senator from Arizona.
Mr. President, like every American, over the past few weeks, I've watched the videos of Americans being shoved and beaten and pepper sprayed and shot and killed by federal immigration agents. Over the weekend, Americans watched what happened to Alex Preddy in Minneapolis, a U.S. citizen, an ICU nurse at the VA who took care of veterans. He was shot and killed by federal agents for no good reason. His family lost someone they loved, and it all happened in the blink of an eye. Before that, it was Renee Good. Renee was a mother and a wife. She was shot and killed in her car, and her family will never see her again. 2 Americans are dead at the hands of their government. That should demand the highest levels of accountability. It is that simple. Instead, this administration has lied to the American people. They have slandered these Americans as terrorists. They have told us not to believe what we see with our own eyes. They blamed Alex Preddy because he was in lawful possession of a firearm. They have tried to block the investigations into what happened. We also know that these are not isolated incidents. Just the other day, ICE conducted a series of workplace raids at a sports bar in Phoenix, places where families go to just have some wings and watch a game. The agents wore masks and tactical gear, and I watched a video of ICE officers doing a drive-by, spraying a woman in the face who was just standing on the sidewalk. They sprayed her with mace. She was not doing anything wrong. They violated her constitutional rights. These are the actions of a rogue agency that is storming cities, violating the constitutional rights of Americans, and creating volatile situations where tragedies happen. This is not making Americans safer. It is clearly doing the opposite thing, and it has to stop. I am the son of 2 police officers. From a very young age, I learned that law enforcement should exist to serve and protect people. We can enforce our laws without this chaos. We can enforce our laws without federal agents killing people in the streets of American cities. We should demand that as senators, as Republicans and Democrats, as Americans. We should all demand better. And we should use our power to make that happen. That's why I will not vote for the Department of Homeland Security budget this week, because that agency needs an overhaul from the top down and the bottom up. That's why the head of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, and the guy who everybody knows is actually making the decisions and calling the shots and running the show, Stephen Miller, both of them should be out of jobs because they have lost the trust of the American people. And that's why I introduced the Stop Excessive Force in Immigration Act to rein in and stop this abuse of power. This bill sets limits on the use of force and the use of firearms by immigration agents. It restricts the use of tear gas flashbang grenades, and pepper balls. It requires body cameras to be used, and it restricts the use of face masks. It requires accountability and transparency so that when somebody is hurt or killed, the American people will get some answers. This is pretty basic stuff. It should be what all Americans expect from law enforcement, and it should be something that both Republicans and Democrats alike can support. Because I believe that we are better than this. I believe we can keep communities safe without this chaos. But that depends on all of us stepping up right now at this moment before another American ends up dead in the streets. Thank you, and I yield the floor.
What unfolded in this hearing was not a procedural dispute or a routine clash of ideology. It was a moment when the weight of government power was placed directly on the record. When Mark Kelly stood on the Senate floor, his voice carried more than frustration. It carried consequence. He spoke after weeks of footage, after public statements, after events that forced Americans to confront what happens when authority operates without restraint. And in that moment, he did not hedge. He did not soften his words. He named responsibility and demanded accountability. Kelly's statement was anchored in specific actions and specific outcomes. He described federal agents acting with force against Americans, incidents that ended lives, families permanently altered in seconds. He rejected the idea that these were isolated mistakes or unavoidable accidents. Instead, he framed them as the result of leadership choices. Policies set from the top, rhetoric that inflamed rather than calmed, and oversight that failed when it mattered most. His message was simple and severe. When power is misused, consequences must follow. The senator's words cut deeper because they challenged a familiar defense in Washington. The insistence that official narratives matter more than what the public can see. Kelly accused the administration of denying visible reality, of dismissing footage, of shifting blame rather than confronting facts. He argued that when institutions tell people not to trust their own eyes, something fundamental has broken, not just in policy, but in the moral contract between a government and its citizens. This moment exposed a larger truth about modern governance. Federal agencies are granted extraordinary authority with the expectation that it will be exercised carefully, lawfully, and with respect for constitutional limits. When that authority expands without clear boundaries, when oversight is weakened, the results ripple outward. Trust erodes. Tensions rise. Communities feel occupied rather than protected. And the legitimacy of the system itself begins to crack. Kelly's remarks also drew a sharp line between enforcing laws and creating chaos. He made clear that public safety does not require intimidation, secrecy, or tactical displays meant to dominate rather than serve. Coming from the son of two police officers, that distinction mattered. It reframed the debate away from ideology and toward principle. Law enforcement, he argued, exists to protect people, not to terrorize them, not to provoke volatile encounters, not to operate as if accountability were optional. The hearing took a decisive turn when Kelly announced he would withhold his vote from the Department of Homeland Security budget. That was not symbolic, it was leverage. It was a declaration that funding without reform is complicity. And then came the moment that defined the hearing, his call for the removal of Kristi Noem and Stephen Miller. He argued that leadership had forfeited public trust, that decisions made behind closed doors had real-world consequences, and that those consequences demanded accountability at the highest level. This was not merely a rebuke of individuals, it was an indictment of a governing philosophy that treats power as something to be wielded aggressively rather than responsibly. Kelly's remarks suggested that when decision makers are insulated from consequences, abuses become normalized. Oversight becomes performative, And the distance between policy and human cost grows dangerously wide. The introduction of the Stop Excessive Force in Immigration Act underscored that this was not just about condemnation, but correction. Limits on force, transparency through body cameras, clear rules governing tactics. These were not radical demands. They were basic expectations in a constitutional system. Expectations that many Americans assume already exist until moments like this reveal otherwise. What this hearing ultimately revealed is a country at a crossroads. A moment when citizens must decide whether authority will continue to expand unchecked or whether accountability will be restored. Whether visible harm will be dismissed as collateral or confronted as unacceptable. Whether leadership will acknowledge failure or double down on denial. In that Senate chamber, Mark Kelly did more than deliver a speech. He issued a warning. That chaos cannot be justified in the name of security. That trust, once lost, is difficult to recover. And that a government unwilling to correct itself risks becoming disconnected from the people it claims to serve. This is the deeper meaning of what we witnessed. Not just a call for firings, not just a budget dispute, but a test of whether American institutions are still capable of self-correction, whether power can be restrained by principle, whether accountability still has a place in the system. Moments like this do not resolve themselves quietly. They demand attention. They demand public scrutiny. And they demand engagement from citizens who refuse to look away. If you believe transparency matters, if you believe accountability matters, if you believe the American system must answer for the power it exercises, then stay engaged. Subscribe to Liberty Report USA. Support our work to expose the truth.